The water glasses at Le Fantôme shimmered under the recessed lighting, each one costing more than my monthly electricity bill. A hushed reverence filled the dining room, the kind of quiet that costs a fortune. It was broken only by the clink of silverware and the sound of my sister Chloe holding court. "The residency in Florence is truly a dream," she said, her voice carrying across the table. She swirled her champagne, a theatrical gesture she'd probably picked up from some old movie. "It's where the masters were reborn. I feel like I'm finally stepping into my own renaissance." My parents, David and Eleanor, beamed at her. Their faces were practically incandescent with pride, twin lighthouses guiding the SS Chloe to glory. This whole nauseating affair, the five-star dinner, the designer dress hanging off Chloe's shoulders, the trip to Florence itself, was funded by the ghosts of my past. Specifically, the ghost of my childhood home, sold 6 months ago while I was relearning how to walk. "We're just so proud you never gave up on your passion," Mom cooed, reaching across the table to pat Chloe's hand. The air smelled of Mom's expensive perfume, and the truffle oil drizzled over everything, a combination that made my stomach churn. I took a slow sip of water, the ice clinking against the glass. It was a nice sound, a real sound, in a room full of fakes. My father cleared his throat, turning his high-wattage smile on me. It was the smile he used on business clients he was about to fleece. "Jennifer, darling," he began. That word, darling, was a weaponized term of endearment, meant to soften the blow of the coming demand. "Chloe has a bit of a cash flow issue," he continued, steepling his fingers. "A silly little mix-up with the residency deposit. And, well, the cost of quality art supplies in Tuscany is just astronomical. Here it comes." My mother slid in, her voice as smooth as poison. "It's not a big deal, really, but we were thinking, since your credit is so clean, you could take out a small loan for her, just to tide her over. Think of it as an investment in her future, in the family's future." They were doing it again, the same old song and dance. Find a need of Chloe's, frame it as a family crisis, and then present my wallet as the solution. Only this time, things were different. I wasn't the same broken girl they'd taken advantage of after the accident. My body had healed, and something else had woken up inside me. As they laid out their plan, a vision sliced through the noise. It wasn't a memory, it was a premonition, cold and sharp as shattered glass. I saw a letter on cheap paper, my name and address printed at the top. A single brutal word was stamped across it in red ink. Default. In another flash, I saw Chloe on a sun-drenched beach, laughing into her phone, a brightly colored cocktail in her hand. My loan, her vacation. The math was simple. A familiar tremor of panic started in my chest, the ghost of the helpless girl I used to be. But I crushed it. I stamped it out like a cigarette butt. I looked at my parents, at my sister's expectant face, and I summoned the ghost of a smile. "Of course," I said, my voice sounding small and hesitant, even to my own ears. "Anything for my sister." The relief on their faces was instantaneous and obscene. They were already mentally spending my money. I excused myself and walked out of the restaurant, the oppressive quiet giving way to the electric hum of the city night. The neon glare of a nearby hotel sign painted the wet pavement in strokes of pink and blue. I took a deep breath of the cool, exhaust-tinged air. It felt cleaner than the air in that dining room. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting a follow-up text from my mother about banking details. It was a notification from a stock trading app I'd downloaded a week ago. A volatile biotech stock, one a fleeting vision had told me to pour my entire meager savings into that morning, had just announced a revolutionary new trial. Its value hadn't just climbed. It had launched into the stratosphere. A series of green numbers glowed on my screen, so bright they seemed to pulse with a life of their own. A cool $250,000. They wanted a small loan. I almost laughed. I was about to buy back my life. The smell of antiseptic is a scent that never leaves you. It burrows into your memory and builds a nest. For weeks after the car crash, it was all I could smell, a chemical fog that clung to the scratchy hospital sheets and the bland food on the trays. I lay in that bed, broken and dizzy, and that's when the visions started. Not as a power, not yet. just as terrifying, disconnected flashes. My parents stood by my bedside one afternoon, their faces arranged into careful masks of concern. "Honey, we have to talk about the house," my father said, his voice low and solemn. "The medical bills are piling up," my mother added, twisting her handkerchief. "And with Chloe's tuition for the art academy, we just don't see another way." "We have to sell," he said, delivering the line like a doctor pronouncing a death. "It's the only way to keep everything afloat and give your sister the future she deserves." As he spoke, a dizzying wave of images washed over me. I saw them in the living room with a realtor, a man with teeth too white. I saw champagne flutes, not hospital water cups. I heard my father say, "It's a blessing, really. Jennifer's situation gave us the push we needed." They weren't sad. They were relieved. I was too weak and drugged to protest, and they knew it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand of my cramped apartment, pulling me from the memory. A text from Mark. "Heard about Chloe's residency. Amazing. We should celebrate when you're free." Mark, my childhood crush. My best friend who had held my hand after the crash and told me, "It's for the best, Jen. It's just a building. We'll make new memories." Then he'd helped my parents pack. As I stared at his name, a new vision hit me, sharp and unwelcome. Mark and Chloe in a dimly lit bar, his hand slipping into the back pocket of her jeans. I heard his voice, clear as day. "She's a sad, jealous mess, but don't worry, I can handle her. I'll get her to give you the money." My stomach twisted. I tossed the phone onto the couch and opened my laptop. The hum of the machine was a quiet declaration of war. My apartment was a sterile box in a building full of other sterile boxes, its only window looking out onto a brick wall. It was a long way from the sprawling oak tree outside my bedroom window, from the scent of my mother's roses after a summer rain. I ignored Mark's text. I ignored the lingering smell of antiseptic in my memory. I logged into my trading account. This wasn't gambling. It was surgery. The visions came more clearly now. A news headline about a tech firm's surprise merger. A ticker symbol for a pharmaceutical company about to get a crucial FDA approval. It was a celestial roadmap laid out just for me, and I followed it without question. Each click of the mouse, each transfer of funds was a brick. I wasn't just making money, I was laying the foundation for a fortress. My late-night research, guided by a flicker of a future news clipping, led me to the public records for my old address. The house had been sold to an elderly couple, the Abernathys. A deeper, more focused search brought me to Mr. Abernathy's business, a local manufacturing plant. Another targeted vision, this one of a headline dated 3 weeks in the future, gave me the final piece of the puzzle. Abernathy Industries files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They were going to have to sell, and it was going to happen very, very soon. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. My chance wasn't just coming, it was here. The phone call came 2 days later. It was my father. "Jennifer, I'm about to email you the loan paperwork from the bank," he said. There was no preamble, no "how are you?" Just the booming, authoritative voice he used when he expected immediate compliance. "I need you to sign it and get it back to me by Friday. Chloe's residency is depending on you." It wasn't a question, it was an order. He was so sure of me, so confident in his paternal power. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it sent a thrill of ice through my veins. I let him finish, then waited a full hour before replying. I didn't call, I texted. "So sorry, Dad. I spoke to my bank. My recent medical expenses have really tanked my credit score. I don't qualify for any new loans. I'm devastated I can't help. Give Chloe my love." I could practically feel the waves of their synchronized frustration radiating across the city. The useless daughter strikes again. I pictured my mother sighing dramatically, my father pacing his office, Chloe throwing a minor tantrum. The image was deeply satisfying. While they were stewing in their own entitlement, I was on a video call with a man named Arthur Vance, a private wealth manager whose name had appeared in one of my visions. He was old school, with a crisp suit and a voice that sounded like crunching numbers. "The Shell Corporation is established, Miss Vance," he said. I'd used my mother's maiden name. It felt fitting. "Registered in Delaware, completely anonymous. What is its first intended acquisition? The air in my apartment smelled of the instant coffee I'd been living on for days. It was the scent of my new life. The outstanding debt for a company called Northgate Holdings, I said, reading the name from my notes. Arthur's eyebrows flickered. Northgate? They're a regional distributor, stable but small, an unusual choice. A vision told me they're about to be less stable than they look, I said. He didn't question it. The fee I was paying him ensured he never would. Through the Shell Corporation, I anonymously bought up all of Northgate's commercial debt from 3 different lenders. It was a bold, aggressive move that cost a significant chunk of my initial winnings. In the space of an afternoon, I became the single largest creditor for the company where my father worked as a senior vice president of sales. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a coffee shop, nursing a latte and scrolling through the news on my tablet when I saw it. The headline was even better than my vision had predicted. Northgate Holdings halts operations, recalls debt amidst restructuring crisis. The article explained that an unknown entity had purchased and recalled all their outstanding debt, forcing the company into a corner. To avoid total collapse, they were freezing all executive bonuses and slashing senior management salaries by 40%. My phone rang. It was my father. "Jen, did you hear the news?" His voice was a panicked tremor, all the previous boom and bluster gone. "About my company? They've frozen everything. My bonus, it's gone. We were counting on that for Chloe. For the deposit." He was actually breathless, sputtering in his panic. "I don't suppose... Do you know anyone who might be hiring? Could you ask around? See if any of your rich friends have an opening?" The pathetic desperation was so thick I could taste it. "Oh, Dad, that's terrible," I said, injecting my voice with as much fake sympathy as I could muster. "I don't really know anyone like that. I'm so sorry." I hung up the phone, a slow smile spreading across my face. My own phone buzzed with an incoming email. I opened it. The subject line was 2 words: offer accepted. It was from the real estate agent in my old hometown. The Abernathys had taken my all-cash, above-asking offer. The house was mine. Defeat did not look good on my family. Faced with a financial reality that didn't involve my bank account, Chloe pivoted. Her response to the setback was, I had to admit, creatively vile. I saw it first in an online arts magazine, a splashy feature titled The Trauma of a Gifted Daughter, Chloe Vance's debut. It was about her first solo art exhibition, generously funded, the article noted, by her devoted partner, Mark. And there it was, the centerpiece. A massive, distorted portrait of a girl with my dark hair and my eyes, her face twisted in a silent scream, her form casting a long, oppressive shadow over a smaller, brighter figure. The title of the piece was My Sister's Shadow. The article was filled with Chloe's quotes about growing up with the heavy burden of a troubled sibling and channeling her familial pain into her art. It was a masterpiece of public character assassination, painting me as a mentally unstable succubus who had fed on her light. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. "Jennifer, I just saw the article. It's powerful," she said, her voice dripping with meaning. "Your sister is so brave, turning her struggles into something beautiful. I think it's your duty to be there on opening night to show her your support." The audacity of it left me speechless. Not to defend me, not to question the blatant cruelty, but to command my presence at my own public execution. "I'll think about it," I lied and hung up. I didn't respond to the saccharine, pitying text that trickled in from old acquaintances who'd seen the article. I didn't lash out. I did nothing. My silence, I knew, would be interpreted as shame. They would think they had finally broken me, finally put me in my place as the tragic, supporting character in Chloe's heroic narrative. While they preened, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the agent of a notoriously ruthless art critic named Julian Croft. A flash of a future column headline had shown me his name. Croft was a purist, a man who built his career on eviscerating any art he deemed emotionally fraudulent. I arranged through my Shell Corporation for a hefty, anonymous honorarium to be paid to Mr. Croft in exchange for his review of a promising new local artist. His flight and five-star hotel were, of course, included. The second call was to the events manager of the prestigious gallery hosting Chloe's show. "I'd like to rent the exhibition booth directly opposite the main hall," I said. "The one nobody ever books because the lighting is terrible." "For the whole week?" the manager asked, confused. "For the whole week," I confirmed. "And I want it fitted with a single high-definition video screen, the largest you can install. We'll be running a silent video art piece." "And the content?" "Just leave it dark for now," I said. "My client will upload the content remotely on opening night." The night of the exhibition, I was curled up on the couch in my new, old living room. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the nostalgic scent of the house's old wood. On my laptop, I had a live feed of the gallery from a discreet camera I'd paid a technician to install. The place was packed. Chloe was glowing, holding hands with Mark, accepting congratulations. Then, Julian Croft arrived. He swept through the room like a storm front, his face a mask of bored disdain. He spent less than 10 minutes in front of Chloe's work, his eyes scanning the paintings, his lip curled ever so slightly. 2 hours later, his review went live. He didn't just dislike it, he disemboweled it. "Miss Vance's work is not a cry of pain, but a shrill whine for attention," he wrote. "It is a vapid, narcissistic, and unforgivably shallow attempt to commodify a manufactured tragedy. The technique is derivative, the emotion is hollow, and the entire exhibition feels less like art and more like a desperate and frankly pathetic plea for validation." The effect was instantaneous. People started whispering, pulling out their phones. The review was being quoted, shared, screenshotted. The energy in the room curdled. The crowd of admirers began to thin, melting away into the night, leaving Chloe and Mark standing in a circle of humiliation. Chloe's face was chalk white, her eyes darting around the emptying room. And as she stood there, stripped of her audience, the giant screen in the booth opposite her flickered to life. There was no sound, just a crisp, clear, live video feed. It showed movers carrying a beautiful new sofa through a familiar front door. My front door. The camera panned across the lawn of my childhood home where I was directing the placement of a garden gnome. I waved at the camera with a cheerful little smile. Chloe stared, her mouth agape. Her phone rang, shrill in the sudden silence. The name on the screen was bright and clear, even on my grainy feed. Mark. Duh. She looked from the screen showing me in her old garden to the phone bearing the name of her benefactor, and a look of pure, unadulterated horror dawned on her face. He was cutting his losses. The show was over. They came for me the next day, a united front of the wronged and the furious. My father drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of his now demoted sedan. My mother sat in the passenger seat, rigid with indignation. Chloe was crumpled in the back, her face puffy from crying. They found me on the front porch, sitting on the old wooden swing, a cup of tea in my hands. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the giant oak tree in the yard, dappling the freshly cut grass in gold. "How?" my mother demanded, before the car had even come to a complete stop. She practically fell out of the vehicle, her voice a strangled gasp. "How could you do this? Where did you get the money for this house?" "Did you do something illegal?" my father accused, marching up the stone path. "Is that it? You fell in with criminals?" It was the only way their minds could process it. For me to win, I must have cheated in a way they didn't approve of. I took a slow sip of my tea. The porcelain was warm against my hands. "Why don't you come inside?" I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "We have a lot to discuss." I led them not into the living room, but into the study. The room smelled of old books, lemon polish, and power. On the gleaming mahogany desk, where my father used to pay his bills, sat a single, thick, leather-bound folder. "You're right that things have changed for me," I began, turning to face them. They stood clustered together, an island of fury in my sea of calm. "It started with the accident." I let my words hang in the air. "It triggered something," I said, tapping the folder. "A clause." I opened it. On top was a letter written in an elegant, spidery cursive on thick, cream-colored stationery. I pushed it towards them. "My grandmother's," I said. They stared at me blankly. My maternal grandmother, a woman they dismissed as an eccentric recluse, and hadn't visited in over a decade. A woman who, it turned out, saw them with perfect, terrifying clarity. My father picked up the letter. He read it aloud, his voice starting strong and gradually faltering. The letter was from a law firm. It detailed the terms of a massive trust left by my grandmother. She had despised my parents' materialism and saw Chloe's burgeoning selfishness for exactly what it was. She feared her fortune would be squandered or, worse, used to corrupt. So she'd set up a test. The entire inheritance was locked away and inaccessible. It could only be unlocked by a descendant who demonstrated, in the words of the letter, profound resilience, foresight, and independence in the face of profound familial betrayal. My accident, their callous decision to sell my home, their subsequent attempts to bleed me dry, it wasn't a string of tragedies, it was the final interview. I hadn't just been recovering. I had been qualifying. The visions, I said softly, as they stared at the letter in shock. They weren't some random superpower. They were my intuition, my birthright, sharpened by the hell you put me through. They were my grandmother's way of guiding me to what was already mine. My mother sank into a chair, her face ashen. Chloe just stared at the floor. But the money for the house, the stocks, my father stammered. A small fraction of the liquid assets, I said, pushing another document across the desk toward him. The trust is extensive. It contains many assets, real estate, art, and several controlling interests in various companies. I tapped a paragraph on the page in front of him. Including a 62% controlling share in a regional distribution firm called Northgate Holdings. The blood drained from my father's face. He looked at the document, then at me. The dawning horror in his eyes was a sight to behold. He wasn't looking at his failed daughter anymore. He was looking at his new and decidedly hostile majority shareholder. And right on cue, his phone began to ring. The caller ID was stark against the screen. CEO Frank Miller. He stared at the phone as if it were a poisonous snake. Then his eyes met mine. He knew. With a trembling hand, he answered the call. The unraveling was swift and brutal. My father was offered a generous early retirement package, the corporate equivalent of being taken out behind the woodshed. Without his six-figure salary and a reference, his career was effectively over. The pretentious townhouse they'd been renting, a perk of his senior position at Northgate, came with an eviction notice. My mother's social standing, built entirely on the foundation of my father's job title, evaporated overnight. Her friends stopped answering her calls. Chloe's art career was a joke, a viral meme of failure, and Mark had not only dumped her but publicly threatened legal action if she ever contacted him again. Their world, so carefully constructed from money and status, had collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. They came to me on a Tuesday. I was in the garden, on my knees in the soft soil, planting a row of deep red rose bushes. The air smelled of damp earth and the promise of future blooms. I looked up at the sound of a taxi pulling away, and there they were, standing outside the wrought iron gate. Not a family, but three separate, broken people. They looked small and lost, like refugees at a closed border. I stood up, wiping the dirt from my hands onto my jeans, and walked slowly toward them. The performance began. My mother wept first, her shoulders shaking. "Jennifer, we are so sorry," she sobbed, clutching the bars of the gate. "We were fools, blinded by silly things." "We made terrible mistakes," my father chimed in, his voice hoarse. He looked old. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a gray, weary despair. "We lost sight of what was important. We lost sight of you." Chloe was last. She wouldn't look at me. She stared at the ground and mumbled, "I was awful. I know that now. I was just so insecure." They spun a tale of regret, of profound and sudden enlightenment. They talked about family, about forgiveness, about how they had learned their lesson and were ready to be better. It was a masterful script, delivered with Emmy-worthy conviction. Then came the final plea. "We have nowhere to go," my mother whispered, her eyes wide and pleading. "They're putting us out at the end of the month. Please, Jen. Let us come home. Just for a little while. A small room, that's all we ask." Home. The word was a profanity in her mouth. I looked at their three desperate faces. the faces that had once been the entire center of my world. I searched within myself for the anger, the hatred, the burning need for revenge that had fueled me for months, but it was gone. In its place was only a vast, quiet calm, a stillness. The war was over. I had won. There was nothing left to fight. I looked my father in the eye. I looked at my mother's tear-streaked face. I looked at my sister's bowed head. "No," I said. The word wasn't loud, it wasn't harsh or triumphant. It was a simple statement of fact, a closing door, a final, unbreakable boundary. I saw the shock register on their faces, the dawning realization that the script had failed, that there would be no encore. Without another word, I turned my back on them. I walked back to my garden, to my roses, to the rich, dark soil that was waiting for me. Behind me, the automatic sprinkler system hissed to life, right on schedule, casting a shimmering curtain of water between my new world and the ruins of my old one. 8 months later, the house was finally mine in every sense of the word. The ghosts had been evicted along with the bad memories. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, illuminating rooms that were no longer shrines to the past, but living spaces filled with books, plants, and the quiet hum of contentment. The air smelled of fresh brewed coffee and the salty sea breeze that drifted up the hill from the coast. On my laptop screen, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile was finishing her report. She was the director of a foundation I had established and funded anonymously. We called it the Phoenix Fund. "The grant came through just in time for the family in Ohio," she was saying. "The foresight you provided about that zoning change saved their farm. I don't know how you do it, but you're a guardian angel to these people." "Just a good analyst," I said, smiling. My visions, once a tool for revenge, now served a different purpose. They were a quiet force for good, a way to tip the scales for people who, like me, had been betrayed by the ones who were supposed to protect them. That afternoon, I tackled the last bastion of the old regime, a stack of boxes in the attic labeled family. I worked my way through them, tossing out old report cards and forgotten holiday decorations. At the bottom of the last box, I found it. A framed photo of the four of us on a beach vacation years ago. We were all smiling. I was a child with a gappy grin, Chloe was pouting theatrically, and my parents looked young and happy. A ghost of a memory from a life that felt like it belonged to a different person. I felt a flicker of something, not anger, not sadness, not even nostalgia, just acknowledgement. A quiet, final farewell. I didn't tear it up. I didn't need to. I simply placed the photo face down back in the box, taped it shut, and shoved it into the darkest corner of the attic. The past was no longer a weapon pointed at me, it was just a story that was over. That evening, I took a cup of tea out to the front porch. I settled onto the old wooden swing, the chains groaning a familiar, comforting song. Wrapping a soft cashmere blanket around my shoulders, I watched the sky over the distant ocean bleed into a spectacular display of orange, pink, and deep purple. I wasn't waiting for a vision. I wasn't planning a countermove or bracing for the next betrayal. My mind was quiet. The evening air was cool and clean on my face. I took a deep, slow breath, feeling it fill my lungs. It was the breath of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged on the other side, not scorched, but forged. A woman who was finally, truly, and completely free. I was home, and I was at peace.